It was a quiet evening in the heart of a bustling city, where life flowed like a steady river, weaving its tales in the intersections of streets and alleys. The sun dipped below the skyline, casting long shadows that danced with the flickering streetlights. A soft breeze whispered through the trees, carrying with it the hum of distant laughter, the chime of a bicycle bell, and the occasional honk of a car horn. It was a night like any other, or so it seemed. On the corner of Maple and 7th, a small neighborhood store stood proudly, its neon sign buzzing faintly. Inside, an elderly woman named Miss Clara shuffled between aisles, her weathered hands skimming the shelves as she picked up her weekly groceries. Miss Clara was a fixture of the neighborhood, a kind soul who always greeted everyone with a warm smile, her laughter echoing like a melody that brought comfort to those who heard it. She wore her years gracefully, her silver streaked hair tied neatly in a bun, her eyes carrying a wisdom earned through a lifetime of trials and triumphs. Unbeknownst to her, the tranquility of this ordinary evening was about to shatter. Outside, the low rumble of a motorcycle engine grew louder, cutting through the peaceful hum of the street. The rider, clad in black leather and a menacing helmet, parked haphazardly near the curb. He moved with an air of arrogance, his boots clanging heavily against the pavement as he strode toward the store. He was known around the area, a troublemaker with a reputation for intimidation. Nobody knew his real name. To most, he was just Tank, a nickname that fit his hulking frame and aggressive demeanor. Inside the store, Miss Clara was oblivious to the brewing storm. She approached the counter, her arms laden with items, and exchanged pleasantries with the young cashier. The sound of the bell of the door jingling barely registered in her mind until she turned to see Tank walking in. His presence sucked the air out of the room, his heavy boots echoing ominously as he made his way to the back. For reasons no one could explain, Tank had a chip on his shoulder that night. Perhaps it was the heat of the day or the weight of some unseen burden, but his temper was like a lit fuse, sparking with each step he took. As he brushed past Miss Clara on his way to the cooler, their shoulders barely touched, but it was enough to ignite his rage. "Watch where you're going, old lady," he growled, his voice low and threatening. Miss Clara, ever the peacemaker, smiled gently and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, young man, I didn't see you there." But Tank wasn't in the mood for apologies. He scoffed, towering over her like a storm cloud, his posture radiating hostility. The cashier, sensing the tension, hesitated to intervene, his fingers frozen above the keys of the register. What happened next unfolded in a blur. Words escalated into aggression, and before anyone could react, Tank's fist shot forward, striking Miss Clara. The impact sent her crumpling to the ground, her groceries scattering across the floor. Gasps echoed through the store as the once lively atmosphere turned deathly silent. Tank stood there, his chest heaving, as if daring anyone to challenge him. The other patrons were too stunned, too frightened to move. But Tank had made a grave mistake, one he would come to regret. From the back of the store, a man stepped forward, his expression calm, but his eyes burning with an intensity that could pierce steel. He was dressed casually, his demeanor unassuming, but there was something about the way he carried himself, an aura of quiet authority that demanded respect. His name was Marcus, and he had been browsing the shelves, lost in thought, until the commotion snapped him back to reality. What Tank didn't know, what nobody there knew, was that Marcus was no ordinary man. He was an off-duty Navy SEAL, trained in disciplines most could only dream of mastering. And as he looked down at Miss Clara, unconscious on the floor, something inside him shifted. This wasn't just any elderly woman. This was his mother. Marcus knelt beside her, his hands gentle as he checked her pulse. Relief washed over him when he realized she was still breathing, but the sight of the bruise forming on her cheek ignited a fire within him. He stood slowly, his movements deliberate, his gaze locking onto Tank with a precision that froze the room. Tank smirked, clearly misreading the situation. What are you going to do about it? He sneered, flexing his fists. But Marcus didn't respond. Instead, he took a step forward, his every move exuding a calm confidence that only someone like him could possess. The tension in the room crackled like electricity, each second feeling like an eternity as the two men faced off. Tank's smirk didn't last long. Something about the way Marcus stood, calm, composed, yet radiating quiet power, made his confidence falter for just a second. But he pushed the feeling aside. To him, Marcus was just another guy, another nobody who would back down like the rest. You got a problem. Tank scoffed, stepping closer. The store was silent. The cashier's hands trembled over the register. A woman in the back gripped her purse tight, frozen in fear. Nobody dared to move. Nobody wanted to be next. Marcus didn't flinch. His eyes flickered to his mother, still unconscious on the floor, then back to Tank. He wasn't a man who acted on impulse. His training had drilled patience into him, made him analyze before making a move. He studied Tank, the way he stood, the way his muscles tensed, the slight shift in his feet, like he was waiting for an excuse to throw another punch. Apologize, Marcus said, his voice even. Tank let out a harsh laugh. Apologize? He glanced around the store, looking for someone to back him up. Man, are you serious? Marcus didn't repeat himself. He just stood there, his presence alone enough to thicken the air. Tank's bravado cracked just a little. He wasn't used to people standing up to him. Usually, his size and reputation were enough to keep people in check. But Marcus was different. Before Tank could react, Marcus took a step closer. A small step, but one that shifted the balance of power in the room. Suddenly, Tank wasn't in control anymore. You hit an innocent woman, Marcus continued, his voice still calm but carrying weight. You don't get to walk away from that. Something about the way he spoke sent a ripple of unease through Tank's chest. He squared his shoulders, trying to regain control. Yeah, and what are you going to do about it? Marcus could have handled this in 100 different ways. He could have put Tank on the floor in seconds. But that wasn't the goal. He wasn't here to prove his strength. He was here for justice. Tank didn't understand that. You think you're tough? Tank sneered, stepping in Marcus's face now, his breath hot with arrogance. I don't care who you are. You don't scare me. Marcus could smell the aggression coming off of him like smoke before a fire. He could see the way Tank's fist twitched, the way his weight shifted onto the balls of his feet, preparing for a strike. But Marcus had seen this 1,000 times before. On missions, in bars, in alleyways overseas where trouble found him whether he wanted it or not. Tank had already lost. He just didn't know it yet. Before anything else could happen, the store's door burst open. A young man in a hoodie rushed in, breathless. His wide eyes darted from Marcus to Tank to the unconscious woman on the floor. Yo, what's going on? He asked, his voice shaking. He knew Tank. Everyone in the area did. He also knew that when Tank was involved, things rarely ended well. The cashier finally found his voice. He hit her, he said, motioning to Miss Clara. The young man's face darkened. You serious, man? She's like everybody's grandma. Tank rolled his eyes. Stay out of this. But now the tide was shifting. More people were gathering outside. A couple of bystanders peered through the glass. The quiet tension inside the store had started leaking into the streets. Marcus stayed still, waiting. He knew when a man like Tank was feeling cornered, he was more dangerous. If he acted now, he might set something off too soon. He needed to wait for the right moment. Miss Clara stirred slightly on the floor, letting out a small, pained groan. Marcus immediately crouched beside her, his tough exterior softening in an instant. Mom! His voice was low, gentle. He reached for her hand, squeezing it. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused for a moment before settling on him. She looked confused, then pained, and then relieved. "You're here," she murmured. "I'm here," Marcus confirmed, his grip tightening just a bit. Miss Clara's gaze flickered around the room, landing on Tank. Her face tense, but she didn't say a word. Tank shifted on his feet. The energy in the store had changed. For the first time, he felt something creeping up his spine. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was realization. Marcus wasn't just some guy, and he wasn't going to let this go. And that's where the story begins. What happened next would become the stuff of neighborhood legend. A tale of justice, courage, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her son. But as Marcus prepared to take action, one thing was certain. Tank was about to learn a lesson he'd never forget. Tank took a step back, but he tried to play it off like he was just shifting his weight. The confidence, Tank swallowed hard. He didn't have a response. The young man in the hoodie finally moved, pulling out his phone. "I'm calling an ambulance for Miss Clara," he said. Then, after a beat, "in the cops." Tank didn't argue. Maybe, for the first time in his life, he had nothing to say. Marcus knelt back down beside his mother, checking her bruises, his touch careful. She looked at him, her eyes filled with pride, gratitude, and something deeper, something only a mother could feel when her child stood up for what was right. "You're always watching out for me," she whispered. "Always," Marcus said. Outside, sirens began to wail in the distance. The weight of the moment settled over everyone in the store. This was the end of something. And maybe, for Tank, it was the beginning of something else. Something he hadn't faced before. Accountability. As Marcus held his mother's hand, he didn't feel anger anymore. Just relief. And for the first time in a long time, the neighborhood felt just a little safer.